Thank you for joining us for our lunchtime webinar, and it's entitled today, How to Provide a Positive Recruitment Experience. So before we get started, I just want to help you navigate Teams Live if you've not used it before. So just at the top bar on your screen, you should see two speech bubbles with a question mark inside, and that is the Q&A box. So I'll just give you a minute just to locate that. But if you have got any questions throughout the presentation, do feel free to pop any of your questions in the Q&A box, or if you've got any at the end of the presentation as well. And what we'll do is we'll leave 10 minutes or so at the end and we'll go through the questions. Hopefully we'll have, maybe 2 or 3 questions we'll be able to get through. But yeah, do feel free to ask any questions that you might have as we're going along as well, so you don't forget them. There's also a chat box in there, so if you do have any comments, you want to say hi or tell us where you join us from, please, again, you can use the chat function. I think there's a React one, maybe an emoji one. So yeah, there's lots of ways to interact throughout the session. So do feel free to get involved. We'd love to hear, if you've got any comments or questions. So I do have a couple and I'll allow them to introduce themselves in just one moment. But just to introduce myself, so my name's Emma Ferguson. I work at the University of Salford. I manage the Student Ambassador Scheme at the University of Salford, and I work quite closely with, I'll give them a little shout out. So you've got Lee from Salford Unitemps, and also Amjad I work with as well. They work really hard for me to do all my right to work checks and contracts. So if anybody's doing that particular role, I applaud you, because we have a couple of hundred on the scheme. I know some universities have between like 400 and 600. I went to a conference recently and I couldn't believe the numbers. So I know that people at Unitemps work really hard. So I'll hand over the time now to our panellists, and if you just want to introduce yourselves in turn. Thank you.
Do you want to get first? Hi there, guys. I'm Sam. I'm from the Unitemps team. It's from Staffordshire University. So my job essentially is to try and place our students and graduates into employment in the Staffordshire and Cheshire area, whether that be on a part-time basis, full-time position, or any temporary work. So at the moment, we're working with companies for any summer temp jobs. And Ben is from Wavemaker. Ben is currently working with the Unitemps team from Staffordshire University.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, I'll just quickly say we've been, as a local business in Stoke-on-Trent, we've seen a big shift from having face-to-face interviews to then doing it online. It's been great working with Sam and the team at Unitemps in Stoke with a recent round of government funding that we had to hire 2 new members of staff for. So the whole experience has been brilliant.
Perfect, thank you both. Okay, we'll dive into some questions now. Thank all of you as well for those that have submitted questions ahead of time. We've really used those questions to kind of shape the discussion. We've got quite a broad range of questions as well, so hopefully we'll have quite a lively discussion today, and it'll be quite informative for you as well, and we'll give you lots of top tips. But we'll just start with the initial question that candidates had around the advice that we would give. So I'm going to give this one to Sam first of all, and then obviously Ben, you feel free if you've got anything to add as well throughout. But what advice would you give for ensuring candidates feel supportive and well informed at that initial stage?
Yeah, I think it's really important to obviously have clear communication with the candidates who apply for a job. So the best way to do this, in my opinion, is to give every candidate a phone call, just to acknowledge the fact we've received their application form, and just say, we'll be sending your CV across to the company to take a look at. We'll be in touch in a week's time with an update, just so the candidate is aware that we've received their application form and they know the next steps in the process. I think it's really important if the candidates get an interview that they need a few things to consider is like the company address, transport, how to get there, if they're coming from university, if they're getting a bus, a taxi, or driving themselves. So it's really important for you to know that if there's a car park there, for example, or a bus route if not. What we've done previously, we've recently had some warehouse opportunities for our students last year, where they wanted roughly about 90 students to start work in the space of a month. So what we did is, myself and my manager, we did a bit of a video to show the directions from the university to the company itself. And by doing this, we ensured all the students knew exactly where to go from the university to ensure that they all turned up on time and they knew where to meet on their first day.
Do you want to add anything to that, Ben?
Yeah, I think from a personal perspective as an employer, I would say we would always say that it's a two-way thing as well. So the communication, I completely agree with everything you said, Sam, but I would just say to them, look, any questions answered, anything you're worrying about, you're thinking about, you can fire back and you can ask us those questions before you come to us, because there might be things that we haven't thought about. We try and put ourselves in the position of those applying and attending, but there might be some questions they have that we haven't thought about.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice point, actually, to kind of see it from the other side. And I think I really like what you said there, Sam, about the video, because I think nowadays a lot of people are visual learners anyway. But, if I want to look something up, I tend to look it up on like YouTube, or, people might use TikTok, and we are quite visual. I think the first barrier for lots of candidates might be just actually navigating their way to the interview itself, managing public transport, which we know can be quite tricky at times, even if you're parking and, knowing where to go. So I think if we can kind of eliminate any kind of stress around all of that, I think that'll help with the nerves and kind of anxious feelings as well, which we are going to come on to a bit later in the discussion. But yeah, I think that's a really nice point about the video element to it, because I think so many students now, they kind of rely on looking at things that are visual. Okay, so if we just move on to our next question, then this is now moving more into the interview part of the recruitment process. So I'll come to Ben for this one first, but Sam, if you've got anything you want to add as well, by all means, do feel free. So Ben, when you're interviewing people for Wavemaker, what sorts of things do you do to ensure that people feel supported and like they can perform to their best?
Yeah, thanks, Emma. So obviously there'll be the whole process prior. So stuff that obviously Sam's chatted about before. We'd make sure they've got a clear understanding of what to expect in the interview, who's going to be there. In terms of the people interviewing, the panel would reflect, or the size of the panel would reflect, I suppose, the size or the scale of the job. And we'd let them know that in advance. We'd say, look, this is how it's going to take place. This is, if it's online or face-to-face, what to expect, who's going to be on the panel. In terms of length, again, it would obviously depend on the role we're going for. But we're a firm believer in the past few times we've interviewed, is that we've had hopefully a very relaxed interview process of, say, we've set, up to an hour, but we've said no longer than. And then we've tasked them with a practical thing as well. So this might be they have to present do a presentation that they can then submit online, or separately, they don't have to do it there and then. But always just making sure that we can read the room and say that this process isn't intended to make you feel awkward or put you under pressure. And even though I might slightly appear confident, I'm constantly feeling anxious about a load of things. So I would come straight out with that and say, look, we're just as excited and nervous as you are. So look, take your time. If you need to pause, breathe, have a drink of water, this is the situation. And just let them know that we want to get a feeling of who they are as an individual, and if they're a right fit for the role. The CV will be banging, be perfect, but this is maybe just that extra bit to go, how do you think we could gel together? Does it work? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think that's really nice. I think, yeah, sort of seeing it as almost like a bit of a two-way conversation. Like it sort of humanises the whole experience on both sides, doesn't it? As you said, and I think you've done like quite a good sort of empathetic explanation there of how they might be feeling, actually how you're feeling as a panelist as well, kind of flipping it for them. I think that's a really nice way to think about it, actually. Have you got anything you want to add to that, Sam?
Yeah, so the feedback that we've had from our candidates when they went for an interview with the Wavemaker was, they said it was just like a normal chat with Alex and Ben, and they said that helped them massively, because a few interview panelists can be quite intimidating, whether sitting in a row asking you questions non-stop. but they said they felt at ease speaking to Alex and Ben, and they said it didn't feel like an interview at all. And that's the importance, I think, where if you're not as nervous, you can just kind of show who you are as a person and what you can do. What we tend to do is when we set up an interview with the candidates, we just like the candidates to know, who the company is, what they do. So in preparation, we send the candidates the company website so they can do a bit of research on them before they go, just so they've got a heads up of who they are, who they might be speaking to during the interview. We also like to give them the dress code for an interview. I know some companies want them smartly dressed, some are quite casual. So just little things like that just help massively to help the nerves. So when they turn up for their interview, they know who to look out for and what to, roughly what to expect.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that. I love all of those points, and that's really, really useful. Okay, so moving on to, we've sort of talked a little bit around kind of like one-to-one interviews. And Unitemps does help to recruit roles where there are lots of people involved. And I'll sort of make a start on this one just with the ambassador scheme. We had a question around assessment centres and also interviewing more than one person doing group interviews. So we do manage quite a lot of students in the scheme, and we recruit every sort of September time. And we don't really have the staffing capacity to do lots of one-to-one interviews. And actually, I'm not even sure it's completely appropriate for the role that we're looking at. So we do run centres, and we've got a welcome induction team that do a similar thing, and a graduation team that do a similar thing, and course inquiries, and they're all looking for different things. I think for us, it's making sure that what you do in the assessment centre, those kind of skills and sort of practical exams, tests that you do, scenarios, kind of linked to the job they're going to be doing. So we, first of all, we tend to do a bit of an icebreaker. So for us, we're more interested in their personality. So are they approachable? Are they friendly? Can they? It's not so much about them. It's more about how they come across as individual. So for us, that's kind of what is the most important thing out of it. So we'll just set them like a bit of a topic of debate to sort of see how they, work as a team. Do they kind of sit back? Do they contribute? Do they lead the discussion? We'll send them scenarios. Again, it's not necessarily about what their knowledge is around safeguarding. It's more about, can they creatively come up with solutions? Are they appropriate? And then we'll do like a quick fire kind of student panel round, because we always do that on our event days as well. So it kind of replicates what they would be doing. So are they comfortable speaking on the spot? Can they give, meaningful answers? Can they add to discussion and say something that someone else hasn't already said on the panel? Can they make eye contact? Are they confident with public speaking? How do they work as part of a group? Because we never have our ambassadors work singular, they always work together. So do they work as part of a team well? So that's kind of what we're looking for. I know that our course inquiries team, they set their recent round candidates some sort of taskmaster style challenges, because a lot of what they do is kind of looking at like records and admissions, and it's about information retrieval. So it's important they have good attention to detail. So those taskmaster challenges were more about, attention to detail and how they describe things and communicate. So I think in assessment sense, I think they're a really good way to kind of observe a lot of your candidates at one time. And I think it's about tailoring the experience so you get the skills from them and they can exhibit that kind of tie into the role. Have you got anything else you wanted to add, Sam or Ben, on that?
Yeah, so within our team, we have an internal team. So I work with external companies, and there's a few members of staff in our team who fill internal jobs at the university. So things like assessment centres work really well with our internal team, because sometimes a student might apply for a job and they might not have the relevant qualifications or skills for it. So with our members of staff, they can kind of have an overview of the session, and if they don't think they're a good fit for a certain position, they can recommend them to a different department within the university and just say, listen, I don't think you're quite right for this job. However, there is another position coming up somewhere else. I'd like to put you forward for this. So if it's a case of you aren't suitable for one job within the sector, there are loads of other opportunities available depending on your skill sets, pretty much.
I haven't really got anything to add to that, Emma.
No?
I agree with everything you guys have been saying.
Yeah, well, we're going to come to you for the next one, Ben, anyway. So we've had a few more questions around interviews. We'll sort of stick on that topic for a moment. But when an interviewer isn't necessarily given kind of as thorough answers as you'd like, how do you kind of ask those follow-up questions and kind of get that balance between, I guess, trying to get more information out of them, but also have them feeling like they're not being interrogated.
Yeah. Again, I think it goes back to communication, and so even if that's face to face or remotely, if we're doing it online, I will set right from the beginning. I'll say, look, if I look away, it's because I'm reading the questions I've got prepared for you. So don't be upset about that. And if, like just now, if suddenly my concentration is broken, it's because I'm writing something down, I'm taking notes. And so don't be worried about this, or don't be frightened about this. I will also say to them that although there may be, I'm not going to say buzzwords, but there might be some key examples that we're trying to, mark off against almost, with the candidates. So I would say, look, during this process, you might organically answer a question and I'll kind of keep pushing down that route. And I'm not hanging on waiting for you to say, I don't know, intergenerational, and suddenly I do a massive tick. But it's about trying to tease that out of them. Again, I think it comes down to a clear understanding of the people doing the interview. So we're not talking over each other, or we're not suddenly, so it doesn't come across as an interrogation. And again, I think it goes back to the previous question around having some form of personal experience of what it can be like, without saying it's not trauma, but I remember going for an interview through the local authority where there was like 10 people on a panel, and I'd literally say something and they would all just go, okay, and suddenly look away and start scribbling away, and I'm thinking I've got something wrong here. So it's just about having it clear right at the beginning that if we start to pursue, if you say something that's of interest, that we might go away from that question and ask other questions, and we're frantically making notes, and it's all good. It's not negative,
Yes, that's really good to know. And yeah, I think sometimes when you do ask them follow-up questions and you kind of move away from, like, I guess, like your script questions, if you like, I feel like you do get more from the candidate as well, because I think it is a bit more organic and it is quite natural as well in that sense. Like you've said, I think it's only actually a positive thing in that point of view, actually. So kind of sticking on the theme of kind of follow-up questions really for this next one. So we have had a question in around, I think is quite common actually, I know we see this a lot, around someone who may be applying for a promotion, or perhaps they're looking for a more permanent role and they're currently temporary, and you're interviewing them but you already know them. So I'll sort of take this one first, and obviously Sam and Ben, you're more than welcome to come in. But I think the key for us, and what I've said before in an interview, is obviously we know who you are, but for the purposes of this interview, just act as though we don't know who you are. We don't know what job you currently do, we're not sure what your experience is, and treat it as that way, as if you were an external candidate. Because I think the big mistake that we find internal candidates always make is that they assume knowledge. And actually, we can only really mark on what we see and what we hear. And so putting it across them, we need thorough answers, just as you would for any interview. So making sure, you're giving support and evidence, you're giving those examples, don't be afraid to talk about the current role that you're doing, especially if it's, you're then applying for a permanent role or something that's quite similar, or a promotion, because all of that experience is really essential. And that's, why you've got the interview in the first place. We want to know about it, because I had recently when we were interviewing a graduate intern, and they were working as an ambassador for us actually, and they didn't mention any of their ambassador work, and I kind of fed back afterwards and sort of said, why didn't you mention any of that work? And again, it was this assumption of, well, that I already do all that already, or I wasn't sure that I could talk about it. And you absolutely have that advantage where you need to be able to talk about it all. So I would ask, we did try and ask follow-up questions, and I would always ask follow-up questions if it was an external or an internal candidate, but it has to be a fair and equal process at the time as well. And we can only mark on the answers that we give. So yeah, I think that's a really important one, that we don't, as then panelists, try and create those links and fill in those gaps. They need to kind of, they need to see that themselves really in that situation. But yeah, I think it can be a bit of a tricky one. So we've kind of touched on this already actually, and I think you've both given some really nice kind of supportive examples of this. But we have had a question around, I think this is really common, we sort of talked about at the beginning. Do you have any advice for helping people, Ben, to stay calm in an interview? Because as we sort of talked around, it can be a really nerve-wracking experience, especially if you've got a one-to-one interview and you've got kind of 3 or 4 panelist members. So how do you kind of encourage people to kind of stay calm?
I think again it's a very individual, it can be a very individual experience, obviously, for the people who are interviewing and also for the panel. If I think back to our last round of interviews for roles, obviously they were online. We're a tech company, we digital inclusion and digital transformation. And so right from the get-go, we had candidates whose presentations weren't linking or weren't syncing or they couldn't share. And straight away, we were like, look, this is okay. We've been here before. So I think for us, it's about constantly just touching back and saying, look, you're doing great. It's not about blowing smoke or anything. It's about just saying, look, we've been here. Look, to handle that the way you did when that presentation wouldn't go live, when you had to share it, you styled right through it. And like Sam touched on before, actually, it shows us a side of them that we wouldn't normally see. In that instance, if we want them to present to people all over the country, how they handle something going wrong. So I think it's just constant reassurance, really. And it's not being fake. It's just being, look, you're doing great, brilliant. Do you want a break? You've answered questions already that we haven't asked yet. So it's just giving, just being human, I think, maybe is the word.
Yeah, I think that's really a good point. I think technology is wonderful when it works, but we've all been there when it fails. And we all logged on early today to make sure that everything was working. So yeah, it does happen. I think it shows, if you can sort of manage that, I think that kind of says a lot about your character as well and how you are in them situations. I'm just going to move on, Sam, to the next question just in the interest of time. And I'm going to come to you on this one. But kind of moving away from interviews now, the downside of recruitment is having to reject candidates. And I just wondered, Sam, have you got any advice for how you go about kind of rejecting unsuccessful candidates?
Yeah, so unfortunately, with every job, there's going to be successful and unsuccessful candidates when applying for positions. My preference is to obviously speak to the candidates over the phone to let them know they haven't been successful. If after, say, 3 or 4 days, I'm constantly trying to ring the candidates, leaving voicemails, and I can't get hold of them, I would then have to send out either an email or leave a voicemail to the candidates just to give them an update on why they haven't been successful. I think it's always important to get feedback from the company, whether if they've got the job or if they haven't got the job. By doing this, we can let the candidates know why they haven't been successful, and by telling them why they haven't been successful, it could be something that they could, explore and trying to improve on the next interview. So by knowing what your weaknesses are, you can go away, improve on them, and when you come back for another interview, absolutely smash it and get the job. But all being well. And I think as well for the successful candidates who have got the job, by knowing what they've done well in their interview, they can use that as a strength for the next time they go for a promotion or go for a different job elsewhere as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's really constructive advice. I think sometimes as well, I think you can do everything right in an interview. You can, give really good support and examples. And sometimes it's just about the look on the day. And on a different day, you may have got that position and actually you're highly appointable, but someone might just come in who has more experience on that particular day, and that's something that you can't control. That's kind of out of your control. You can only really focus on what you can control, and that's about how you perform in that interview. And I think putting that actually, this actually comes on to our next question, Sam. I'll come to you again on this, and obviously, Ben, you can jump in as well. You kind of touched on this already, but for those who are unsuccessful, but as we said, might be highly appointable and might be a good fit for another company role, what advice would you give in this scenario?
Yeah, so what I tend to do is, if a candidate isn't successful, I always say to them, listen, your CV is amazing. So I speak to the candidates and just say, I can keep hold of your CV for the next few months. If any other positions do come up that's similar to your area of interest, I'll of course be in touch. The work that I do, I have a lot of repeat businesses that come back to us if they want any students or graduates to work. So if a company got back in touch and said, I'm looking for this position to be filled, can you advertise? I would say, well, we have just had a student who's been for an interview who wasn't successful, unfortunately, but they're amazing. Can I send you their CV across to have a look at? And we have done this over the years, and it has worked really well, where the company's taken a look at the student's CV, had an initial Teams call with them, invited them in for a face-to-face interview, and they've got the job without the job actually being advertised.
Yeah, definitely. Have you got anything else you want to add around kind of unsuccessful candidates, Ben, sort of in general?
I think it's a challenge for an employer. You know, when we were interviewing in a few of the previous rounds as well for roles, where the people who weren't successful were getting in touch with us directly and saying, why was I not successful? And so again, you've got to try and be a bit, it's that balance between being honest and being professional, you know. What's really helped us, I think, was working with Sam and Unitemps to be able to go, look, this is what we thought of the candidates, this is how they interviewed. And then Sam was able to, and the team were able to then give that information over and be that separation. And it's not that any of them were terrible or anything like this, but it's just, you know, I know what it's like. Again, you go in and you think, I want to make sure I'm doing this right. And then if you don't get it, you go and tell me why I didn't get this role. What did I do wrong? And actually, like you said, Emma, it could be a whole raft of things. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so it's almost time for the Q&A. We've done a really good job today sticking to time, which is excellent. So before wrapping up, I just thought we could all come in on this actually. But if you've got any final top tips for providing a positive recruitment experience that, you know, anything that we haven't mentioned today that you'd like to kind of just bring up now as sort of in closing?
Yeah, so I just think clear communication from day one with the candidates, just so once they've applied for a job, they are fully aware that you've received their application form. They're aware if they've got an interview or if they haven't been successful for an interview, and if they have, you know, they need to know where the company's based, what time, what location, transport links, things like that. And it's also important that the feedback from the interviews, the candidates, they know what the strengths and weaknesses are. So the next time they have an interview, they can take those strengths into them. And if they do have any weaknesses, it's something they can go away from the interview and work upon for the next time, you know, they go for a job.
Yeah, I would just say with anything, if it's face-to-face or if it's remote, if it's online, really try and put yourself in the position of the person that's coming on for the interview. So is there a waiting room online? What information's in there? Could you go in and say, look, thank you for coming on, give us 10 minutes and then we'll bring you into the call. If it's face-to-face, is there somewhere that they're attending where they go before they get brought into the room? Do they meet someone? It's just all these little things that maybe within the job you forget what it's like when people first come on for an interview. So it's just that stuff.
Yeah, brilliant. I think they're all really good top tips as a bit of a final way to wrap this off. One of the things that I did was I actually put this to my, so I have like a student focus group and we meet once a month. And I find it a really useful experience for me. It's been incredibly valuable to get kind of the other side, really, their input on kind of Unitemps, recruitment processes, events that we run, all sorts of different things. So if you are an employer and you are able to offer that, I would strongly suggest that that's a really useful platform to get feedback and honest feedback. And so I asked them this question actually, our last one, and what the students said was they'd like more information and background about the job that they're applying for, responsibilities, sort of, I guess just a bit more of a sort of breakdown to make it easier for them to apply. They also said they preferred the group interview because they find, I think we've sort of touched around this a lot, that actual individual interviews can be quite intimidating. And I guess for lots of students, you know, this might be their first interview that they have with us, so sort of keeping that in mind, kind of where they're at in their kind of career development. Students also added that they actually enjoyed the group interviews because one of the students has said that they actually got to know people on the assessment day who then also got hired, who they got to work alongside, which I thought was really nice. I hadn't thought about it in that sense. And then actually they said when they started the role, they felt a lot more comfortable because they kind of knew, well, sort of had familiar faces and sort of people that they knew that they'd met at the observation day as well. So I thought that was quite a nice perspective on having actual assessment centres as well. And what I'll do now is I'll take some questions from the live Q&A. We've got about 10 minutes, about 5-7 minutes to get through a few of these. I don't want to sort of leave people starving over lunchtime. But I'll come into one that we've had. So, and I'll ask this to both of you, and we can all kind of chip in. So as an employer, has the business done any work around inclusive recruitment? For example, moving away from traditional CVs which don't suit all?
Yeah, I think we're quite guilty of forgetting, or maybe only knowing what we know. We're currently working on a project around with MPFT and Health Trust around mental health, etc. And a lot of what we're doing is around accessibility. So the things we're creating, we're ploughing ahead and doing it and then going, oh, hang fire, we haven't engaged with this community that we should be. And I think this is a perfect example as well, where we, in the case of this previous role that we've just advertised, we were looking at the role and I thought, well, hang on, I'll bring in some of our colleagues that work within accessibility teams for the local authority and beyond to just double check, is the language we've been used in the job role adequate? Where's it going? What is there other places where we could advertise this? So like some targeted advertising, going direct to people. I'd love to move away from the idea of a traditional CV, but all those things as well, like we were very careful with the language we used in terms of gender and kind of pigeonholing around skill sets as well. We were very clear with just this is what the role is. But I think it's a whole area that a lot more organisations, ours included, could be doing more with. Yeah. But I think we need help with that, really. Sorry, keep talking.
I know that one of the teams that work at the university, so they offer a variety of means. So we've kind of moved away from CVs, and that we get them to fill out an application form. We get them to sometimes just write kind of 3 answers to a question, or just one answer, a paragraph of like 400 words. We also do video interviews as well, which work really well for us, because when we're looking at kind of like marketing ambassadors and those that are going to do sort of the digital media side role or social media, it's actually about how they come across. And you can get someone who is fantastic on paper, but actually, as I guess that's the whole point in interviews, isn't it? See then how someone comes across. But actually, if we eliminate the first part, we just get them to do almost like a application video, and we found that's worked really well. And just to kind of offer like a variety of different ways. So we've tried it a few ways. We've kind of tried them to answer sort of 3 simple questions around why they want to be an ambassador, what they know about the role, and then we've done sometimes just one question as well, or like an application form where we've tried to collect lots of different details from them, so that we can, if we do have events where we need care leaver students, or we need mature students, or we need students from a certain background, then we've got all that information as well. So we've done that as part of the application form, because that really helps us to kind of link in students to certain jobs as well. Okay, I'll just take another one. So this is kind of like a 2-part question, if you like, so we might just have time to do both parts for this one. But how much time would you give between the application deadline and inviting for interview? And then equally, how long between interviews and then contacting rejected candidates? So kind of both around sort of timescales on them ones.
Yeah, when we advertise a job, we tend to advertise it for roughly about a week. And then after a week, that's when we start to review the CVs. In all honesty, it just depends on the company and the employer. As soon as we send the CVs across to the company, we give it up to about a week before we hear anything back. If we haven't heard anything back after a week, we'll chase up the company and just say, can you give me an update on these CVs? And again, sometimes the companies get back in touch the same day, some get back in touch the next day. It just depends on how quick they're looking to fill the position. and depending on how many weeks notice that candidate needs to give, that's how soon you can sort the position, pretty much, really.
Yeah, it's the same experience for us, really. We were a lot of our previous roles that we've gone through with Unitemps, it was funding led, so there was a timeline attached to it, and of course, making sure we've got the right candidate then starts to push everything. And we're very fortunate we got some great people with Sam and the team, but we normally work on like a week basis. So you enter and you submit. We'll let you know if you've been shortlisted within a week of closing. Then likewise after the interview, a week, really. But some people we knew straight away, so we just told them straight away. I think it can just depend.
Yeah, I would say we try to tell candidates sort of within a day or two, because I think there's nothing worse, especially if you interview on a Friday, you've got to wait all weekend until the Monday.
Yeah.
I think there's absolutely nothing worse. So yeah, we try and have quite a quick turnaround, especially when it comes to kind of contacting rejected candidates. And one of the things that links into that I mentioned earlier about kind of internal candidates, we always give them the option as well, if we want to have a face-to-face meeting, just because we have that option. We wouldn't necessarily do it for an external candidate. We would always call them or give them, written feedback or however they wanted it in that sense. But for an internal candidate, the option of being able to have a face-to-face meeting, so we offer that option as well, if they want to. I think we've got time for one more if we keep our answers really quickly. But when interviewees are required to do additional activities, so for example, like we talked about a test or a presentation, do you think this should come before or after the interview questions?
Ooh.
Interesting one.
So every time we've done it before. My theory on this is because it's a presentation, that could be the most nerve-wracking aspect of it all. So come in, hey, welcome, great, good to see you. Have you had a good weekend? Right, let's do your presentation. Get it out of the way. And then suddenly there's a bit of relax. I suppose it's like a speech at a wedding. Maybe it should be before the meal. I don't know.
Have you got anything on that, Sam?
Yeah, same as what Ben just mentioned then. The majority of the companies that we work with, they prefer, if that is the case, they prefer to do it first, because it puts, like Ben mentioned, it puts the students or graduates at ease. And then, like I said, they can just be themselves once the presentation's finished. And it's just a bit more of a relaxable environment for them once it's out of the way with, yeah.
Yeah, and I would agree with both. I would say we tend to do presentation first, because that's something that they've actually got control of, that they've prepared, and we find that kind of encourages their confidence. Then once they've got through that portion, they're a bit more relaxed then, they can kind of relax into the interview. So we tend to give about 10 minutes for presentations. We find that's ample time. I think any more than that can be a bit too much preparation as well for them. Okay, well, thanks for the questions that have come through on the Q&A, and also thanks to those that were submitted in advance as well. It's really helped to, like I said, structure the session and kind of guide us through from kind of initial communication through to kind of interviews and assessments to rejection, kind of handling those in a supportive way and a constructive way as well. And thanks for the questions as well, because I think they've really tied in nicely, the live Q&A ones. So just to let you know, a recording of the webinar will be available on the Unitemps website, and everyone who signed up to the event will be emailed with a link to the recording when it's being published. You can also follow Unitemps on all the various social media platforms. They're on LinkedIn, they're on Instagram, X, TikTok and Facebook. Just want to thank you for your attendance today, for kind of interacting throughout the session. Obviously, thanks to Ben and Sam, our panellists, who have done a wonderful job in guiding us through all the questions. I will definitely be re-watching this back myself, because there's been lots of useful tips and advice that I've not thought of for making this a really supportive recruitment experience for everyone involved, and that's been kind of the main message today. So thank you everybody, thanks for your time, and I hope you have a really good rest of your day. Thank you.